My son slapped me across the face while his wife smirked, shattering 50 years of my love in a single second. He thought I was just a rug to walk on, a quiet widow he could silence with violence. But while he is at work today, oblivious and arrogant, I just sold his house out from under him. He believes he is the king of this castle, but he is about to find out he is just a trespasser. My name is Evelyn Marwood. For 58 years, I have walked through life trying to be as soft and unobtrusive as the beige carpets in the hallways of the Northbridge Civic Bureau, where I file paperwork. I am a widow who learned long ago that silence is safer than noise. And since my husband passed, my world has shrunk down to the four walls of the colonial-style house on Elm Street. It is a beautiful structure, with ivy climbing the brickwork and a porch that catches the sunset. But inside, the air is often thick with things unsaid. I share this space with my son, Logan Marwood, and his wife, Ariana. Or perhaps it is more accurate to say they allow me to occupy a corner of it while they fill the rest with their loud, vibrant, and increasingly hostile lives. Tonight was supposed to be a celebration. It was Logan and Ariana's 3rd wedding anniversary. The dining room table was set with the good china, the porcelain plates with the gold rims that I usually keep wrapped in tissue paper. I had spent 6 hours in the kitchen, roasting the beef until it was tender and glazing carrots with honey and thyme just the way Logan liked them when he was a boy. 12 guests filled the room, a mix of their friends and a few colleagues. The candlelight flickered against the crystal wine glasses, casting warm, dancing shadows on the walls. Laughter rippled through the air, clinking forks and animated chatter creating a symphony of domestic perfection. I sat at the far end of the table, sipping my water, feeling a rare warmth in my chest. For a moment, we looked like a happy family. Then the temperature in the room seemed to drop 20 degrees in a single heartbeat. Ariana placed her wine glass down with a deliberate click against the wood. She looked at me, a small, tight smile playing on her lips that did not reach her cold eyes. She spoke softly, but her voice cut through the ambient noise like a serrated knife. "It is funny how we are celebrating our future," Ariana said, her gaze fixed on me, "when someone at this very table has been working so hard to destroy it." The conversation died instantly. Forks froze halfway to mouths. The silence was sudden and absolute, heavy enough to crush lungs. I looked up, blinking, my napkin clutched tight in my lap. I assumed she was making a joke I did not understand. "Oh, do not look so innocent." "Evelyn," Ariana continued, her voice rising just enough to command the attention of every person in the room. "Everyone here knows. You could not stand seeing Logan succeed. Could you? You went to his boss. You spread lies about my past to ensure Logan missed that promotion. You want us to fail, so we remain stuck here with you forever." A collective gasp swept through the room. 12 pairs of eyes swung toward me. I saw confusion in some, but in others, I saw judgment. The warmth I had felt moments ago evaporated, replaced by a cold dread that settled deep in my stomach. I opened my mouth to defend myself, but no words came out. The accusation was so absurd, so detached from reality, that my brain could not process it. Logan stood up abruptly. His chair scraped loudly against the hardwood floor, a harsh sound that made 2 guests flinch. He gripped the edge of the table, his knuckles turning white. I looked at my son, searching for the boy I had raised, the boy I had sacrificed everything for. I found only a stranger. His face was flushed, his jaw set in a hard line. and his hands were trembling with a rage I had never directed at me before. I felt a storm gathering, a dark and violent force swirling around the dining table. But I was standing in the eye of it, blind and confused. I had done nothing but cook their dinner and fold their laundry. I had done nothing but love them. My voice was barely a whisper when it finally broke the suffocating silence. "What are you talking about?" "She told the neighbors." "Logan," Ariana said, her voice dripping with a fake, theatrical sorrow that made my stomach turn. "She told Mrs. Higgins about the pending lawsuit against your firm. She gossiped about confidential client data over the backyard fence while watering her hydrangeas as if it were trivial neighborhood news. That is why the internal audit flagged you. That is why you were demoted last week." The lie was so specific, so intricate, that it sounded like the absolute truth. The air in the room grew toxic in seconds. I could hear the guests shifting in their seats, the expensive fabric of their clothes rustling like dry leaves in a dead forest. I looked around the table, pleading with my eyes for someone to recognize me, to remember who I was. But I saw only judgment. A woman in a blue silk dress whispered to her husband, her hand covering her mouth. But her eyes bored into me with a mixture of pity and revulsion. They looked at me as if I were a senile old woman who had lost her mind. Or worse, a malicious saboteur intentionally destroying her own blood. "That is not true," I stammered, my hands gripping the white tablecloth so hard my knuckles ached. "I never spoke to anyone. I do not even know what an audit is." Logan moved. He did not just stand. He erupted. He grabbed the back of his heavy oak chair and yanked it aside with such force that it skidded across the floor with a screech that set my teeth on edge. He began to walk toward me. It was a slow, predatory walk. His face was a mask of red fury, a vein bulging dangerously in his neck. I looked past him to Ariana. She was standing by the sideboard, safely out of his direct line of fire. Her face was composed, mournful even, for the benefit of the guests. But as our eyes locked, the mask slipped for a fraction of a second. She smirked. It was a cold, satisfied curl of the lips that told me everything. This was not a misunderstanding. This was a calculated execution. "Logan, listen to me," I said, my voice trembling, rising in pitch. "She is lying to you. I do not know anything about your work." "Shut your mouth," Logan screamed. The sound was deafening in the small dining room. Spittle flew from his lips. "Do not lie to me, not anymore. You have always been jealous of us. You have always wanted to keep me here, trapped in this house with you." I shrank back into my chair, making myself as small as possible. I had seen Logan angry before over a lost baseball game, a scratched car, but I had never seen him look at me like this. His eyes, usually a warm hazel, were black with hate. He looked at me not as his mother, but as his enemy. "Logan, that is enough," a man named David said, standing up from the table. He reached out a hand to steady my son. Ariana was there in an instant. She placed a hand on David's forearm, her touch light but firm. "No, David," she whispered, loud enough for the table to hear. "Let him vent. He has been carrying this burden for so long, he needs to get it out." David hesitated, looked at Logan's shaking back, and then sat down. The room was paralyzed. No one moved. No one breathed. Logan stopped inches from my face. I could smell the expensive red wine on his breath and the acrid scent of his sweat. I looked up at him, tears welling in my eyes, waiting for him to see me. Waiting for him to remember the woman who had worked double shifts to buy his textbooks, the woman who had held him when his first girlfriend broke his heart. "You are a burden," Logan hissed, "a useless, jealous old burden." "Logan, please," I whispered. He pulled his hand back. I flinched, squeezing my eyes shut. But a part of me did not believe he would do it, not until the palm of his hand connected with my cheek. Crack. The sound was louder than a gunshot. The force of the blow snapped my head to the side. My vision blurred. A stinging, white-hot pain exploded across the left side of my face, radiating into my jaw and ear. Somewhere in the room, a wine glass hit the floor and shattered. Someone gasped, a sharp intake of breath that sounded like a sob. I sat there, frozen, my hand hovering over my cheek, but not touching it. My skin felt like it was on fire, but the heat on my face was nothing compared to the ice spreading through my chest. My son had hit me. The boy I had birthed, raised, and worshipped had struck me in front of strangers. I heard heavy breathing, Logan's panting, like a wild animal. I tasted copper in my mouth. Slowly, the shock began to recede, replaced by a clarity I had not felt in years. I looked at the floor, watching a shard of glass glint in the candlelight. If I stayed silent now, if I wept and begged for forgiveness for a sin I did not commit, I would be destroyed. Ariana would win. I would be thrown out or locked away. I understood then that the mother in me had to die so the woman could survive. I had to take back the night. The sting on my cheek seemed to unlock a door in my memory that I had kept bolted shut for decades. Time folded in on itself, dragging me away from the dining room and back to a rainy Tuesday 25 years ago. That was the night the police knocked on my door to tell me my husband's car had skidded off the bridge. I was 33 years old, holding a sleeping 5-year-old Logan in my arms, and suddenly the world was vast, dark, and terrifyingly expensive. I remembered the smell of stale coffee and floor wax at the Northbridge Civic Bureau. For 15 years, I worked the night shift because it paid $2 more an hour than the day shift. I filed building permits and tax liens while the rest of the city slept, my eyes burning from the harsh fluorescent lights. I did it so I could be home in the morning to make Logan pancakes. I did it so he could have braces on his teeth and brand-name sneakers on his feet. I wore the same winter coat for 12 years. I never took a vacation. I never went on a date. My life was a ledger where every entry was a sacrifice made in his name. He used to be so sweet. I remembered the way he would cling to my leg when I dropped him off at school, promising to marry me when he grew up so I would never be lonely. But that boy died the day he met Ariana. It was a slow death, a gradual erosion of affection. At first, it was just missed Sunday dinners. Then it was short, clipped phone calls. Then came the requests for money, always framed as temporary loans that were never repaid. Ariana did not steal him. She simply rewrote him. She treated me not as a mother-in-law, but as a utility. I remembered the time she laughed when I bought a new dress, asking if I was planning to audition for a period drama. I remembered how she would leave her muddy shoes by the door for me to clean, walking past me as if I were invisible. 3 years ago, I had packed my bags. I had found a small apartment near the library. I was ready to leave. But Logan had stopped me at the door, tears in his eyes, begging me to stay. "Ariana is stressed. Mom," he had said, holding my hands. She needs you. We need your help around the house. Please do not leave us. I stayed because I thought it was love. Now, sitting in this chair with my cheek throbbing, I realized it was never love. It was convenience. I had trapped myself in a cage of my own making, believing that my utility was the same thing as my value. I had been a maid who paid the mortgage, a ghost haunting her own life. Look at me when I am talking to you. Logan's voice shattered the memory, pulling me violently back into the present. The candlelight seemed harsh now, exposing the sweat on his forehead and the madness in his eyes. He was not the boy who promised to protect me. He was a stranger with a raised hand. I looked up, my eyes locking with his. I did not flinch this time. I did not cower. I just looked at him with a profound, hollow sadness. You are pathetic, he spat. Then his hand moved again. The second slap was different. The first had been reactive, a burst of uncontrolled anger. This one was deliberate. It was a punishment. It connected with the other side of my face. A heavy, dull thud that rattled my teeth. My head snapped back, and a lock of hair fell across my eyes. It hurt. Yes. My skin felt raw and abused. But the physical pain was a distant echo compared to the sensation of my heart finally breaking. It did not break like glass. It tore like wet paper, silent and irreparable. I tasted blood. I slowly lifted my head, brushing the hair from my face. The room was utterly silent. 12 people sat around the table, adults with careers and voices, yet not a single one of them moved. They stared at their plates, at the walls, at their hands, anywhere but at the elderly woman being assaulted by her son. They were paralyzed by the awkwardness of it, terrified of intervening in a domestic disaster. Their silence was as violent as Logan's hand. I looked at Ariana. She was no longer smirking. She was watching Logan with a gaze that was almost clinical, assessing the damage, calculating the next move. She had won. She had broken me down to nothing, or so she thought. Deep inside that wreckage, something cold and hard began to solidify. The mother who would die for her son had just been killed, and the woman who replaced her was done bleeding. I slowly lifted my head. The stinging in my cheek was still there, pulsing in time with my frantic heartbeat, but the tears that had threatened to fall earlier had evaporated. In their place was something dry, scorching, and absolute. It felt like fire. I looked at Logan, then at the guests who were still frozen in their uncomfortable tableaus of shock, and finally, I rested my gaze on Ariana. The fear in her eyes was starting to curdle into confusion. She did not know why I was not crying. She did not know why I was not begging. I stood up. My legs, which had felt like jelly moments ago, were now steady columns of stone. I walked past Logan, who was breathing hard, staring at his own hand as if he did not recognize it. I went to the sideboard where my worn leather handbag sat the cheap one Ariana had made fun of last Christmas. I reached into the zippered inner pocket and pulled it out. A small, silver USB drive. It was cold against my skin. I had carried this little piece of plastic around for 7 days, weighing the morality of using it, debating if I had the stomach to destroy my son's illusion of happiness. Tonight, with the taste of blood in my mouth, the scales had finally tipped. Ariana saw it. Her eyes went wide, the color draining from her face until she looked like a sheet of paper. She recognized the drive. She lunged at me. Her heels clacked violently on the hardwood floor as she rushed forward, hand outstretched, fingers curled like claws. "Give that to me," she shrieked, her voice cracking. Do not touch that. I sidestepped her easily, stepped. For all her youth and aggression. She was clumsy with panic. I gripped the drive tighter, feeling its hard edges bite into my palm. Tonight? Only one person will be humiliated, I said softly. My voice was not loud, but in the dead silence of the room, it cut through the air like a razor blade. I walked to the 60-inch flat-screen television mounted above the fireplace. The room was so quiet I could hear the hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen and the ragged breathing of my daughter-in-law behind me. I plugged the drive into the side port and grabbed the remote. The screen flickered from the generic landscape screensaver to a stark file menu. I pressed play. The image that filled the screen was crystal clear. It was grainy at the edges, obviously taken from a distance, but the subjects were unmistakable. It was a restaurant, the expensive Italian place downtown called the Gilded Olive. At a corner table, bathed in romantic, dim lighting, sat Ariana. Across from her was a man with silver hair and a sharp, tailored suit. Derek Fallon, Logan's direct supervisor. The man who had supposedly demoted my son because of my gossip. The video played on. There was no sound, but the body language screamed louder than any words could. Derek reached across the table and took Ariana's hand. She did not pull away. Instead, she leaned in, her face inches from his, and whispered something that made him throw his head back in laughter. Then she brought his hand to her lips and kissed his knuckles. Her eyes locked on his with a look of pure, unadulterated adoration. A gasp went through the room. It was a collective intake of breath that sounded like the room was losing oxygen. Mrs. Higgins covered her mouth with both hands, her eyes wide with horror. David, the friend who had tried to stop Logan earlier, stared at the screen with his mouth hanging open. "Turn it off?" Ariana screamed. She scrambled toward the television, her movements frantic and desperate. "Turn it off, right now. It is fake. It is AI, turn it off." She reached for the power cord, intending to yank it from the wall, but a hand shot out and grabbed her wrist. It was not me. It was Logan. He stood there, his eyes glued to the screen where his wife was currently stroking his boss's cheek. His grip on her wrist was ironclad. His face was pale, drained of all the rage that had been there seconds ago, replaced by a devastating realization. "Let go of me," Logan Ariana cried, pulling at her arm, her nails digging into his skin. "Do not look at it." She faked it. "No," Logan said, his voice sounding hollow, like it was coming from the bottom of a deep well. "I want to see." I stood back, watching the scene unfold. I looked at Ariana, who was thrashing against Logan's grip, and I felt a strange calm. I had been the villain in her narrative for years. I had been the punching bag for 10 minutes. But as the blue light of the television illuminated the undeniable truth of her betrayal, I knew that the balance of power had finally shifted. I looked at her, and she stopped struggling for a second to look back at me. She saw no mercy in my eyes. I had taken enough. I was not retreating anymore. "It is a lie," Ariana screamed, her voice shrill and piercing enough to shatter glass. She yanked her arm free from Logan's grip and stumbled back, her chest heaving. "It is deep-fake technology. You can do anything with computers these days. She paid someone to make that. Look at her. She is obsessed with ruining me." The room wavered. For a split second, I saw doubt flicker in the eyes of a few guests. People wanted to believe the young, beautiful wife over the bitter, battered mother-in-law. It was human nature to look away from the ugly truth. But I was not relying on their faith. I was relying on facts. "I thought you might say that," I said calmly. I reached into my bag again. The movement made Ariana flinch, as if I were drawing a weapon. In a way, I was. I pulled out a thick stack of papers, stapled neatly at the corner. "Video can be manipulated. Perhaps. But these are printed copies of the emails you sent to Derek over the last 6 months. Sent from your personal laptop, the one you leave logged in on the kitchen counter while I clean up your messes." I tossed the stack onto the dining table. It landed with a heavy thwop right next to the roast beef. "Read them, Logan," I said. "Read the one from October 12th. Logan looked at the papers like they were radioactive. His hand shook violently as he picked up the top sheet. The room was so quiet that the rustling of the paper sounded like thunder. "Hey, baby." Logan read aloud, his voice barely a whisper, cracking on every other word. "I cannot wait for this weekend. Being home is suffocating. Logan is so needy it makes my skin crawl. And the old burden. She is still breathing. I swear. She is like a roach that will not die. We need to find a cheap facility to dump her in soon so we can finally have the house to ourselves." A collective gasp went through the room. It was not just shock. It was revulsion. The cruelty of the words, spoken in the context of a family dinner, was absolute. "You called me a roach," I asked softly. "You called your husband needy." No. Ariana was backing away now, shaking her head frantically. Her composure was gone, replaced by the frantic energy of a trapped animal. "She wrote those. She hacked my account. She is trying to frame me because she is jealous." Logan flipped the page. His face had gone from red to a terrifying, ghostly white. "And this one," he stammered. "From last week, you told Derek. You told him that I was too stupid to notice. You were funneling our savings into a private account. You called me a stepping stone." "Logan, stop," Ariana wailed, lunging for the papers, but Logan held them out of her reach. "She is poisoning your mind. Look at her. She is crazy. She is a senile old woman who makes things up. That is enough, Ariana." Logan's cousin, Mike, stood up from the end of the table. He was a big man, usually jovial, but now his face was hard. "The headers on those emails, they have IP addresses, timestamps. You cannot fake that kind of data overnight. Not like this." "You are all against me," Ariana screamed, turning on the guests, her eyes wild. She pointed a trembling finger at me. "She is the problem. She has always been the problem. She is mentally unstable. She invents stories because she is lonely and miserable." She was panting, her hair disheveled, looking from face to face, begging for an ally. She found none, but she still refused to yield. She looked at me with pure venom. "You are a liar, Evelyn, a sick, twisted liar. No one believes you." I looked at her, feeling a strange sense of pity for someone so desperate to hold on to a crumbling castle of lies. I took one step forward. "I have the emails, Ariana. I have the video," I said, my voice steady, anchoring the chaos in the room. "But if you continue to call me a liar, I will plug that USB drive back in. Do you want me to play the audio recording from your car? The one where you and Derek discussed exactly how you were going to trigger Logan's temper so he would kick me out. The one where you laughed about how easy it was to manipulate him." The blood drained from Ariana's face so fast it looked like she might faint. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. She knew that recording existed. She knew exactly what she had said. Her knees gave way. She did not sit. She collapsed into her chair, burying her face in her hands. The fight went out of her instantly, leaving only the hollow shell of a woman who had been caught. The silence that followed was total. She had surrendered. Logan looked at me as if he were seeing a stranger, or perhaps, for the first time in years, he was actually seeing his mother. The red rage that had consumed him moments ago had vanished, leaving behind a terrified, trembling boy who realized he had just destroyed his own world. He stared at the red mark blooming on my cheek, the mark his own hand had put there. His lips parted, quivering as he tried to form words. "Mom, He choked out, reaching a hand toward me. But he stopped short, afraid to touch me. I did not move. I did not flinch. I did not offer him the comfort I had given him 1,000 times before when he had scraped his knees or failed a test. I just stood there, a statue carved from ice and pain. The silence was excruciating. The guests, realizing the show was over and the reality was far too ugly to witness, began to shuffle. Chairs scraped against the floor. There were mumbled apologies, eyes averted to the floor, and the hasty gathering of purses and coats. Within 2 minutes, the front door had opened and closed 12 times, leaving the 3 of us alone in the house that suddenly felt cavernous and cold. From upstairs, a new noise erupted. It sounded like a hurricane had been unleashed in the master bedroom. We heard the violent crash of a suitcase being thrown open, the shattering of perfume bottles, and the hysterical, incoherent screaming of a woman whose mask had been ripped off. Ariana was packing. Logan did not look up at the ceiling. He kept his eyes fixed on the floor in front of my feet. Slowly. His legs seemed to lose their strength. He sank down, not gracefully, but heavily, collapsing until he was on his knees on the hardwood floor. He looked small. He looked broken. "She told me," Logan sobbed, his voice muffled by his hands covering his face. "She told me that if I did not get you out, she would leave me. I was going to do it. Mom, tonight. I was going to tell you to leave." The confession hung in the air, heavy and toxic. It hit me harder than the physical slap had. My son, the center of my universe, had been planning to discard me like broken furniture to please a woman who despised him. For the first time all night, I felt a spark of the old anger. But it was cold now, tempered by a lifetime of endurance. "I worked double shifts for 15 years so you could have a car when you turned 16, I said, my voice flat and devoid of the warmth he was used to. "I wore shoes with holes in the soles so you could have tuition money. I cooked. I cleaned. And I made myself invisible in my own home so you two could play house. And you were going to throw me out on the street. I am sorry. I am so sorry." Logan wailed, grabbing the hem of my skirt like a toddler. I did not see it. I was blind. I looked down at him. A part of me, the mother's instinct that is woven into my DNA, wanted to kneel down, hold him, and tell him it would be all right. But that part of me was tired. That part of me was bruised and bleeding. I did not pull my skirt away, but I did not reach down to touch his hair either. My heart felt like a stone in my chest. "You were not blind, Logan," I said. "You just chose not to look because it was easier for you." Heavy footsteps pounded down the stairs. Ariana appeared in the hallway, dragging a large designer suitcase behind her. Her makeup was smeared, her hair was a mess, and her face was twisted into a snarl of pure hatred. She did not look at Logan, who was weeping on the floor. She looked straight at me. "You think you won?" She spat, her voice raspy. "You are just a bitter old witch. He is all yours. Have fun rotting in this miserable house together." She stormed to the front door, the wheels of her suitcase rumbling over the floorboards like thunder. She yanked the door open and paused for one last shot. "I hope you die alone," she screamed. Then she slammed the door. The sound echoed through the house, a final, definitive period at the end of a long, painful sentence. Logan continued to sob at my feet, a broken man in the ruins of his marriage. I looked at the closed door, then down at my son. I gently pulled my skirt from his grip and turned my back on him. My legs felt weak, trembling with the adrenaline crash. But as I walked toward the kitchen to clean up the dinner, no one had eaten. I felt something stir deep inside me. It was not happiness. It was not relief. It was the awakening of a woman who was finally, after decades of slumber, taking the wheel of her own life. For the next 3 days, the house felt less like a home and more like a mausoleum. I moved through the hallways like a ghost, sticking to the shadows, timing my trips to the kitchen to ensure I did not cross paths with my son. Logan was trying, in his own pathetic, broken way, to glue the pieces of our life back together. He brought me flowers that wilted on the counter because I did not put them in water. He fixed the squeaky hinge on the back door that I had been begging him to repair for 2 years. He hovered in doorways, his eyes red-rimmed and pleading, waiting for an absolution I did not have the energy to give. "Mum, I made some tea," Logan said one evening, holding out a mug with trembling hands. "It is chamomile. For your nerves." I took the mug without looking at him. "Thanks," I said, my voice flat, before retreating to my bedroom and locking the door, while he was at work, trying to salvage the wreckage of his career. I was busy excavating the truth of my own existence. I went into the dusty attic and found the heavy, fireproof metal box my husband had left behind. I sat on the floor, surrounded by insulation and memories, and sifted through the yellowing paperwork. I found the original deed to the house on Elm Street. I had always assumed that, because Logan had taken over the utility bills and paid for the renovations, the house was effectively his. Ariana had certainly acted like it was hers. But as I read the legal text, tracing the black ink with a shaking finger, I realized how wrong I had been. The mortgage was paid off years ago by my husband's life insurance. The title was clean, and it bore only one name, Evelyn Marwood. I stared at the paper for a long time. This roof, these walls, the floor where my son had slapped me, it was all mine. I picked up the phone and called a real estate agency I had seen advertised on a bus bench. I spoke to a woman named Sarah. I asked her a simple question about market value. "Mrs. Marwood?" Sarah said, her voice rising with excitement. "In your school district, with the square footage you are describing, you are sitting on a gold mine. I could list it today and have a bidding war by tomorrow. You are looking at roughly $850,000. Maybe more?" I hung up the phone. $850,000. I sat in the silence of the empty house, letting that number sink into my bones. It was not just a number, it was a passport. It was a lifetime of freedom that I had denied myself because I thought I needed to be a mother first and a human being second. That evening, Logan came home early. He found me in the living room, sitting in my armchair, staring at the cold fireplace. He knelt beside me, placing his hand on the armrest. "Mom," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I know it will take time, but I want us to start over. Ariana is gone. The poison is gone. I will be a better son. I promise. We can make this house a happy place again." I turned my head slowly and looked at him. I looked at the face I had washed 1,000 times as a baby. I looked at the eyes that used to look at me with adoration. But now, all I could see was the man who had let his wife call me a burden. All I could feel was the phantom sting on my cheek. He wanted forgiveness because he wanted comfort. He wanted his mother back because he did not know how to be a man on his own. I said nothing. I just looked at him, my face a mask of impenetrable calm. I let the silence stretch out until it became uncomfortable, until he shifted his weight and looked away, mistaking my lack of words for a silent agreement. "I will go make dinner," he murmured, standing up and walking to the kitchen, relieved. He did not know that was the last dinner he would ever make in this kitchen. Late that night, after Logan had gone to sleep, I sat at the dining room table with my iPad. I opened the email Sarah had sent me. It was a cash offer from an investment firm that bought properties as is. It was slightly below the market estimate, but the closing date was immediate. I read the terms. I looked at the digital signature line. I did not hesitate. I did not cry. I took the stylus and signed Evelyn Marwood in crisp, dark strokes. I hit send. The confirmation popped up on the screen. Transaction pending. I sat back in the dark, listening to the house settle. I had just sold the roof over my son's head while he slept, and for the first time in 50 years, I did not feel guilty. I felt free. The morning sun was deceptively bright as Logan poured his coffee into his travel mug. He adjusted his tie in the hallway mirror, completely unaware that he was standing in a house that technically no longer belonged to him. He kissed my cheek, a gesture that felt more like a habit than an act of affection, and told me he would be home by 6. He said he wanted to discuss repainting the guest room. I nodded, watching him walk out the door. I knew that by 6 o'clock. He would not be worrying about paint colours. He would be wondering where he was going to sleep. As soon as his car turned the corner, the clock started ticking. I did not rush. I moved with the methodical precision of a surgeon. I went upstairs and packed 2 suitcases. I did not take the expensive appliances Ariana had bought to show off to her friends. I did not take the furniture I had spent hours polishing. I took only my clothes, my personal documents, and the small wooden jewelry box my husband had carved for me. I left everything else. The memories of that house were heavy, and I refused to carry them with me any longer. At 10 in the morning, my phone rang. It was Sarah, the real estate agent, Mrs. Marwood. "The wire transfer just cleared," she said, her voice professional and crisp. "The funds are in your account. The buyers are sending their representative to pick up the keys at noon. They want the property vacant immediately. I am ready." I replied. I met the representative on the front porch. He was a young man in a grey suit who looked at the house as nothing more than an asset. I handed him the heavy ring of keys, the front door, the back door, the garage, the shed. I did not leave a note on the counter for Logan. I did not leave a forwarding address. I simply turned around, got into my 10-year-old sedan, and drove away without looking in the rearview mirror. My first stop was the bank. I walked up to the teller and asked for a balance inquiry. When she handed me the slip of paper, I had to hold on to the counter to keep from falling. $782,000. It was more money than I had ever seen in my life. It was the sum of 50 years of sacrifice, finally returned to me. I stood there in the quiet lobby and let a few tears fall, not out of sadness, but out of sheer, overwhelming relief. I was no longer a dependent. I was free. I drove 40 miles south to a town called Ravenshaw. It was a place I had visited once as a child and never forgotten. A quiet community where the river met the sea. I had already arranged a rental over the phone the day before a small, one-bedroom apartment on the second floor of a brick building overlooking the water. It was modest, clean, and completely mine. On the way there, I stopped at an antique shop. In the window sat a vintage mahogany radio, restored to perfection. It was $300. In the past, I would have walked past it, telling myself that money was needed for Logan's car insurance or groceries. Today, I walked in and bought it. By 5 in the afternoon, I was unpacking my few belongings in the new apartment. I set the radio on the windowsill and turned it on. Soft jazz filled the room, mixing with the sound of seagulls outside. I felt a peace so profound, it was almost dizzying. Then, my cell phone buzzed against the wooden floor. I looked at the screen. Logan. I let it ring 3 times before I picked it up. I pressed the answer button and held the phone to my ear, saying nothing. Mom, Mom. Logan's voice was high-pitched, bordering on hysteria. I could hear the wind in the background, implying he was standing outside. Where are you? I am at the house. But the key does not work. And there are people here. There is a construction crew here. They say they own the place. They are throwing our furniture on the lawn. He paused, gasping for air, waiting for me to tell him it was a mistake, a prank, a bad dream. Mum, answer me, he screamed, his voice breaking into a sob. Where are you? Where is my house? That was never your house. Logan, I said into the receiver. My voice was steady, contrasting sharply with the chaotic sobbing on the other end of the line. It was the home your father built for me, and you let your wife turn it into my prison. Now, it is just a pile of bricks belonging to a stranger. I hung up the phone and placed it gently on the windowsill next to my new radio. Outside, the sun was beginning to set over the river, painting the water in shades of violet and grey. I knew he was coming. I had not blocked my number. I had not hidden my location. I wanted him to come, not to reconcile, but to witness that I was no longer the furniture in his life. 2 hours later, headlights swept across my living room wall. I heard the slam of a car door, followed by heavy, desperate footsteps pounding up the exterior stairs of the apartment complex. My heart hammered in my chest, not from fear, but from the adrenaline of a final severance. Mum, Mum, open the door! Logan screamed, banging his fist against the wood. Please, I have nowhere to go. The locks are changed, my clothes are on the lawn, Mum. I stood on the other side of the door, my hand resting on the deadbolt, but not turning it. I could hear his heavy breathing, the sound of a man who had been running a race he did not know he was in until he lost. Go away. Logan, I said loudly. Go back to your wife. I cannot, he wailed. She locked me out of the joint account. She took the car keys. Mom, please. I am your son. Suddenly, another voice cut through the cool evening air. Sharp. High heels clattered up the stairs behind him. There you are. Ariana's voice was breathless, but laced with greed. I knew you would come crawling to her. Logan, tell her to open the door. She sold the house for nearly $800,000. That is marital property. That is our money. I looked through the peephole. Ariana was standing behind Logan, her face flushed. She grabbed Logan's arm, pulling him. Kick the door down if you have to, Ariana hissed. We can sue her for elderly incompetence. We can get the money back and put her in a home where she belongs. Just get that check. Logan. For years, Logan had bent to that voice. He had folded like wet cardboard under her demands. I braced myself for the impact of his shoulder against the door. But it never came. Instead, I saw Logan stiffen. He turned slowly to look at Ariana. His face was streaked with tears and dirt, but his eyes were suddenly clear. Get off me, Logan said. His voice was low, dangerous. What did you say to me? Ariana shrieked. Do not be an idiot. Logan, we need that money. I said get off me, Logan roared, shoving her hand away with such force that she stumbled back against the railing. It is not our money, Ariana. It is hers. It was always hers. You made me believe I was the king of a castle I did not own. You made me hate my own mother just to buy you expensive purses. I made you a man. Ariana spat back. No. Logan shook his head, his shoulders slumping. You made me a monster. Ariana stared at him, realizing her hold was broken. She looked at the closed door, then back at Logan. She let out a scoff of disgust. Fine. Stay here and rot with her. I am calling a lawyer. She turned and marched down the stairs. We both listened to her engine rev and fade into the distance. Silence returned to the hallway, heavy and suffocating. Logan slumped against the door, sliding down until he was sitting on the welcome mat. I could hear his muffled sobs through the wood. Mom, he whispered, I know you are listening. I know I do not deserve to come in. I said nothing. I just pressed my forehead against the cool wood. Do you know the worst part? Logan asked, his voice trembling. That night, at the dinner, when I hit you. He paused, choking on his own breath. It felt good, he confessed, the words coming out like vomit. I was so angry at my life, at how weak I felt, that when I hit you, I felt powerful. If Ariana had not pulled my arm back to stop a scene, I would have hit you again. I would have kept hitting you until you stopped moving. I wanted to kill the part of me that needed you. I closed my eyes, a single tear tracking down my nose. It was a horrific confession, but it was the truth. He had not just been manipulated. He had been a willing participant in his own cruelty. I am so sorry, he wept. Please, just open the door. Let me look at you. I stepped back from the door. I looked around my small, quiet apartment. It was empty of memories, empty of pain. It was mine. No, I said firmly, my voice carrying through the wood. If I open this door, I will be your mother again, and I cannot afford that price anymore. Mom, you taught me the most important lesson of my life. Logan, I said, wiping my face. You taught me that I must not live for anyone else, not even for my son. I heard him gasp, a sound of utter devastation. He stayed there for a long time, weeping on the mat. I stood on the other side, breathing in the silence, guarding my new life with the ferocity of a survivor. Eventually, The footsteps retreated. He walked down the stairs, slow and heavy, into the dark night, leaving me alone in the light. 6 months have passed since the night I left my son weeping on a welcome mat in the dark. The air here in Ravenshaw tastes different. It is salty and clean, devoid of the stale tension that used to fill my lungs on Elm Street. I wake up when I want to, usually to the sound of seagulls arguing over breakfast, not to the sound of Ariana complaining about the coffee beans. I have made friends here. Real friends. There is Martha, a retired teacher who lives next door, and we drink wine on her porch on Fridays. She does not know me as Logan's mother, or that widow. She just knows me as Evelyn, the woman who makes excellent blueberry muffins. I still have most of the money. $782,000 is a lot of security. But I do not hoard it. I found a small plot of overgrown land a few blocks from the ocean, just 1/4 of an acre that nobody wanted. I bought it with cash. For the first time in my life, I am planting a garden that is entirely for me. There are no carrots for Logan's stew. There are only hydrangeas, wild roses, and lavender because I like the smell. When I dig my hands into the cool, dark earth, I feel a connection to the world that I thought I had lost. I am rooting myself. Finally. Logan writes to me every Tuesday. The letters arrive in plain white envelopes, his handwriting shaky but legible. I do not tear them up, but I do not answer them either. I sit by my window with a cup of tea and read them. He tells me he is living in a studio apartment now. He tells me that Ariana left him 2 weeks after I sold the house when she realized there was no money to be squeezed out of him. He is going to therapy. He says he is learning how to be a person, not a reflection of someone else's desires. I miss you, Mum, he wrote in the last one. But I know I do not have the right to miss you yet. I fold the letters and put them in a shoebox. I do not let them hurt me anymore. I used to live for his approval, but now I just live. Ariana tried to reach out, too. She sent a furious email to my old address, threatening to sue me for emotional distress and theft of marital assets. I forwarded it to a lawyer I hired in town. He laughed and sent her a cease and desist letter. I have not heard from her since. She was a storm that blew through my life, destructive and loud. But storms always run out of rain eventually. Yesterday, there was a knock at my door. It was soft, hesitant. By the time I walked across the living room and opened it, the hallway was empty. But looking down, I saw a small cardboard box sitting on the floor. I brought it inside and set it on my kitchen table. My hands trembled slightly as I cut the tape. Inside, wrapped in layers of tissue paper, was a photo album. My heart skipped a beat. This was the album I thought had been lost years ago, the one filled with pictures of Logan from the day he was born until his 10th birthday. The cover, which had been torn and water damaged the last time I saw it, was brand new. It was bound in soft, blue leather. I opened it. Every page had been meticulously restored. The photos were smoothed out, placed behind protective plastic. And on the very last page, there was a sticky note in Logan's handwriting. It had no words of begging, no requests for money. It just said, "You were always a good mother. I am sorry I forgot that." I ran my fingers over the glossy photograph of a 3-year-old Logan splashing in a plastic kiddie pool. I looked at his smile, so innocent and full of trust. Then I looked around my quiet, sunlit apartment. I realized then that my revenge was not about selling a house or humiliating Ariana. Those were just the fires I had to light to burn down the prison I was in. I closed the album and smiled. It was a genuine smile, one that reached my eyes. I was not angry anymore. I was not sad. I was simply Evelyn. My revenge was not destruction. My revenge was that, after 58 years, I finally gave myself permission to be happy. Thank you so much for listening to my story today. I would love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Tell me where you are listening from, and if you think I made the right choice in the end. If this story touched you, please make sure to subscribe to Grandma's Family Diary, hit that like button, and press the hype button to help this story reach even more people who might need to hear it.